The box beneath the stair-rail had started again. Soft at first, like a whisper tapping against the windows, then harder, almost impatient. Keanu stood by the old wooden staircase, his hand resting on the curved railing that still carried faint fingerprints from his childhood. The house was quiet, filled only with the hum of the storm, the ticking of a dusty clock that hadn't been reset in years. It had been 3 days since Patricia, Taylor's funeral. The house felt heavier. Now, like it was holding its breath, Keanu had returned alone. No press, no entourage. It's just him in the home where his mother had once waited by the door, arms folded, eyes full of unspoken hope. Now there were only shadows and silence. He hadn't planned to stay long, just enough to take care of the legal matters, to speak with the lawyer, and to go through her things. But something about this house wouldn't let him leave just yet. Every room echoed with memories that came like waves uninvited, but impossible to ignore. It was on the third night, long after the sun had vanished behind gray clouds, that Keanu opened the closet beneath the stairs. He hadn't touched it in years. It used to be the place where Patricia stored old shoes, umbrellas, and bags from long-forgotten holidays. But now, it was something else, something quieter. There was a small wooden box sitting in the back, half buried beneath a worn winter coat. It was carved with floral patterns and had a tiny silver latch that clicked when he opened it. Inside, wrapped in a faded silk scarf, was a diary. Keanu froze. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted it out. The leather cover was scratched and aged, but on the first page, in Patricia's familiar handwriting, were the words, "For my son, in case I forget to tell you everything." He sat down on the wooden floor right there beneath the stairs, the dim hallway light casting long shadows across the pages. His heart was already pounding, not with fear, but with something deeper, something that felt like a door opening in the past. He turned to the second page. "You were 5 when you first asked me if I was okay. No one had ever asked me that before, not like you did, not with those eyes that saw too much too soon. I didn't have the answer then, still don't. But you made me want to try." The words blurred as his eyes filled with tears. He hadn't cried at the funeral. He hadn't cried when they lowered the casket into the ground. But now, alone with her words, the dam broke. The pages continued, each one a whisper from the past. "I was scared to raise you alone. I was even more scared to be seen as weak. But you never judged me. Even when we lived in that cramped apartment in Toronto, and I could only afford peanut butter sandwiches, you never asked for more. You just smiled, sat on the floor, and told me stories about how one day you'd make it. I didn't believe you then, not because I doubted you, but because I didn't believe the world would let someone like you shine." Keanu closed the book gently and pressed it against his chest. For years he had carried the belief that he had never done enough, that despite the fame, the success, and the kindness people credited him with, he had somehow fallen short with the one person who mattered most. But now, this diary was rewriting that belief. Page by page, he spent hours reading it that night, curled up on the floor like a child again. The world outside continued to storm, but inside the house, something sacred had begun to awaken. Something tender and painful and beautiful. The diary wasn't just a letter from the past. It was a map back to who he was before the world ever knew his name. In the morning, he walked into the kitchen and made coffee. The sunlight was pushing through the clouds as if the sky itself had softened overnight. He took the diary and placed it gently on the table. He wasn't ready to leave, not yet. He needed to read every page. He needed to remember who she really was and who he really had been, before the world had called him a star. Because somewhere in that diary, he knew he would find something even more important than answers. He would find her voice. And it had waited long enough to be heard. The voice between the pages. Keanu didn't leave the house that day. He stayed inside, moving through the room slowly, carrying the diary with him like it was something fragile and sacred. The light was softer than the day before. Less rain. More silence. It was the kind of quiet that invited memory, gentle, patient. It's impossible to ignore. The second morning began the same way. Coffee, no sugar. Black, just how he liked it. He sat at the same table, the diary open in front of him, the window letting in streaks of morning gold. The house still smelled like her lavender and old books. It made something tighten in his chest. He turned to the next entry. Her handwriting was smaller here, almost like she had written it in a hurry, or maybe late at night, afraid the words would escape if she waited too long. You were 11 when you told me you wanted to act. I laughed. Not because I didn't believe you, but because I was afraid to believe. Afraid that if I did, and the world broke you, it would be my fault. I had no map, Keanu. I only had hope. You gave me more of it than I ever admitted. He remembered that day. It came back so clearly now. He had just seen a play at school, and when he got home, he stood in the hallway with that fire in his eyes, declaring with all the confidence in the world that he was going to be an actor. Patricia hadn't said much then, just smiled softly and nodded, but her silence had held weight. Now, reading the truth behind that silence, something shifted in him. He realized how much she had carried without ever showing it, how often she had buried her fears beneath her smiles. He had missed it. He turned another page. The first time I saw you on screen, I had to leave the theater halfway through. I told people I had a headache. The truth. I was crying so hard I couldn't breathe. Not because I was proud, though I was, but because I finally understood what it meant to let go of someone you love. The boy I raised had become something the world now claimed, and I knew I could never protect you again. He stared at that page for a long time. He had never heard her say that. Not once. Patricia had always been calm, composed, even when his fame began to rise. She never clung, never interfered. But now he understood it hadn't been because she didn't care. It had been because she had loved him enough to step aside. Later that afternoon, Keanu found himself walking through the attic. Dust floated in the air like old secrets, and the wooden floor creaked beneath his feet. He hadn't been up here in decades. But something told him to look, and in the far corner beneath the sheet was an old trunk. Inside were boxes filled with photos, faded scripts, ticket stubs. And tucked in a leather folder a letter with his name on it. The envelope was sealed. The handwriting was familiar, slow, careful. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he returned to the diary. It was now clear this wasn't just a collection of memories. It was a journey, and he had to walk every step. He sat back down and flipped. To the next entry. When your father left, I thought the house would break. Not from noise, but from the silence he left behind. I tried to hide it from you. I tried to pretend I was fine. But you knew. I could see it in the way you sat by me on the couch, not asking anything, just being there. You saved me in those moments, and you didn't even know it. His throat tightened. He remembered those nights-long stretches of quiet evenings. Just him and his mom sitting together, the TV playing softly, neither of them speaking. Now he understood what he had been doing without realizing it. He had been giving her peace, offering a presence without pressure. He turned another page. You once asked me why I never remarried. The truth. No one ever loved me the way you did. Not with pity, not with need, just love. It's a kind that stays even when everything else leaves. I never told you this because it felt too heavy to place on your shoulders. But now that I'm gone, I hope you read these words and finally understand you were always enough for me. Tears spilled freely now. He didn't wipe them away. He let them fall. He let the truth sink in. The world had given him fame, roles, red carpets, and applause. But this diary had given him something none of those things ever could have complete. A picture of his mother's heart, and it was bigger than he had ever imagined. Night came slowly. He made dinner the way she used to. Grilled cheese, tomato soup, and apple slices. Simple. Warm. It felt right. He placed the diary beside him on the table and opened the sealed letter. Inside was a single sentence. If you ever feel lost, read the last page. He didn't skip ahead. Not yet. Instead, he turned off the lights and sat in the living room with the diary in his lap.
Oh.
The fireplace glowing softly, The story wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of the ending. He was ready to know her fully, to hear every word she had left for him, because the most powerful voices aren't always loud. Sometimes they're written in ink, buried in silence, and waiting beneath the stairs. Letters she never sent. Next morning, the air in the house felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just more alive. As if the walls themselves were listening now, remembering the woman who had once walked these halls with quiet strength and endless patience. Keanu sat at the table again, the diary in front of him, and for the first time, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since she passed. Peace. But peace didn't mean he had all the answers. In fact, he had more questions now than ever. So he kept reading. The next entry was dated just 2 weeks before his first big film premiere. Her words were sharp and honest, but filled with warmth. They all talk about your talent, your looks, your charm. They don't know the boy who stayed up late reading books to calm his mind. They don't know the young man who brought home groceries with his first paycheck instead of buying something for himself. They see the actor. I see the anchor. I see the kindness they miss in the spotlight. Closed his eyes for a moment. He had spent so many years wondering if she had ever truly seen him, or if she had only seen the version the world talked about. He knew the truth. She had seen everything. Later that day, while searching through her study, Keanu found a shoebox. On the top shelf of a tall cabinet, it was taped shut, and on top was a small note written in pencil. Letters never sent. He carried the box to the living room, sat on the old couch, and slowly removed the tape. Inside were dozens of envelopes. Some yellowed with age, others newer, all addressed the same way. To Keanu, he picked one at random. The postmark was from the year he turned 21. You were quiet today, not sad, just far away. You didn't notice, but I watched you through the kitchen window while you sat in the garden. Your shoulders looked heavy. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but something told me you wouldn't answer, so I'm writing instead. Maybe one day you'll read this and know you were never alone, even when you felt like you were. He set the letter down slowly. That year had been rough. His first real heartbreak, a relationship that ended with more silence than closure. He had told no one, even her, but she had known. Somehow, she had always known. He reached for another. This one was different. No date, just a message. I watched your interview last night. The world applauded your words, but I could see the sadness behind your smile. I wish I could take that pain away. Wish the world understood that sometimes strength means getting out of bed, putting one foot in front of the other. Not everyone will notice that effort, but I do, and I always will. Held that letter to his chest. He remembered that interview too. He had just lost someone close. The media had asked questions. He had smiled and nodded, but inside he had felt hollow. He didn't think anyone had seen through it, but she had. He spent the rest of the day reading those letters, one by one. Some were full of joy, celebrating his successes, his resilience, his quiet acts of kindness. Others were raw, written on nights when she had been scared or lonely, but had found strength just thinking about him. Each letter was a mirror, showing him the parts of himself he had forgotten, the parts that fame had buried, the parts that mattered most. By evening, Keanu had filled an entire notebook with reflections, writing down pieces of the letters that moved him most, memories they stirred, and the quiet promises he now wanted. To keep that night, he walked out into the backyard. The grass was wet from last night's rain, and the air smelled of earth and old roses. He looked up at the sky, stars flickering between drifting clouds. He whispered something. Not loud, not even meant to be heard. Just a thank you. Not for the fame, not for the opportunities, but for the love he had once taken for granted. He returned. Inside, and before bed, he opened the diary again. The next page held something different. It wasn't a memory, it was a list. Things I hope you remember. The world will always try to define you, but you are more than your name. Your softness is not weakness. Your silence is not emptiness. You do not owe the world your pain. It's okay to walk away. It's okay to rest. You are not alone, Reed. The list 3 times then, He whispered the words back to himself, not as an actor, not as a public figure, but as a son, as a boy who still remembered the warmth of her hand when she used to guide him across the street, as a man who had survived loss, fame, heartbreak, and success, and was now beginning to understand what it meant to be truly seen. He placed the diary on his nightstand and turned off the light, and for the first time in weeks, he slept without waking in the middle of the night. Patricia's voice had found him, not through fame, but through love written in ink, hidden in a box, waiting patiently in the shadows. The photo behind the framed canoe woke before the sun. The sky outside was still dark, a deep blue slowly bleeding into gray. The world felt still, not just quiet, but held in some sacred pause. Like time itself had softened for a moment, giving him space to breathe. He sat on the edge of the bed with the diary still beside him, one hand resting on its cover. It was strange how a book so small could carry so much. How words written in private could feel louder than applause. As he made coffee, the kitchen, filled with that same familiar scent from childhood, bittersweet and warm. He hadn't realized it before, but Patricia always brewed her coffee exactly this way. She never taught him the recipe, yet somehow, through years of watching her move quietly in this same kitchen, he had memorized it. He stood in the hallway, sipping slowly. When something caught his eye, it was a photo on the wall. It had been there, for years, framed in gold, slightly tilted. He had passed it dozens of times in the last few days. But this morning, something about it felt different. Maybe it was the light, or maybe it was the fact that he had finally begun to see things not with his eyes, but with his heart. He stepped closer. It was a picture of him at 17, standing beside Patricia. Both of them were smiling, her hand resting proudly on his shoulder. But there was something behind the photo. The edge of another paper, just barely visible through the side of the frame. He carefully removed the photo from the wall and turned it. Over-taped behind it was a folded piece of paper. His heart skipped. He opened it slowly, revealing handwriting that trembled more than the others. This was one of her last letters. The ink was slightly faded, but every word felt clear. If you're reading this, it means you stayed. I knew you would. Not because you owe me, but because you always return to where love waits. I couldn't say all of this out loud. You always looked so strong. I didn't want to break that. But now, I hope you know, there was never a day I didn't think of you first. Never a moment I didn't believe in your goodness. People will say many things about you, Keanu. They'll call you kind, humble, rare. But here's what I want you to remember. You were always enough, before the fame, before the grief, before the silence. You, just as you were always enough. His breath caught. He leaned against the wall, holding the letter close. There was something about those final lines that felt like a key, not just to the house, not just to her heart, but to something deeper inside himself. He placed the letter with the others. Then, without thinking, he walked into the storage room. It was the one room he hadn't entered since returning. This was where Patricia kept things she didn't want others to see. Old journals, projects she never finished. Keepsakes from a life she had lived mostly in the background. The room smelled of cedar and thyme. As he stepped inside, he saw something new. A canvas half-painted, unfinished. It was a portrait of him, young, smiling, full of light. She had started painting it, but never completed it. The edges were still raw, the colors unfinished. And yet, it was the most honest image he had ever seen of himself. Not perfect, just real. Beside the canvas was a note. I stopped because I knew the real you was still unfolding. Maybe it wasn't. My job to finish this? Maybe it's yours now. Keanu sat down on the floor beside the canvas and cried. Not from sadness. Not even from regret, but from recognition. His mother had spent her life quietly building a foundation beneath him. And now he realized every act of kindness he had ever offered. Every stranger he had helped. Every soul he had reached without saying much, it all came from her. Her silence had taught him how to listen her. Strength had taught him how to bend without breaking. Her love had taught him that presence could be louder than words. That afternoon, he didn't read any more pages. He picked up a brush. He dipped it into the old paints that still sat on her shelf, and he began to finish the portrait. Not just for her, but for himself. Because sometimes healing isn't found in letters. Sometimes it's found in the act of creating, of continuing what someone else began. The strokes were slow, uncertain at first. But with each line he remembered, her voice, her laugh, the way she would hum when washing dishes, the way she always tilted her head when she was thinking deeply. All of it poured into the canvas, piece by piece. He didn't try to make it perfect. He just made it honest. And when the sun began to set, casting gold light across the room, he stepped back and looked at it. It was still unfinished, but so was he, and that was okay. He returned to the diary that evening, flipping to the last few entries. And there, he found a small envelope tucked between the pages. This one had only 2 words. Written on it, "Open last." He placed it beside him on the nightstand. His heart knew what it might say, but he wasn't ready, not yet. There was one more piece of the story to uncover, and tomorrow he would find it, not in the house, not in the pages, but somewhere even deeper. The place she never forgoeth. Next morning, Keanu stood at the doorway with a duffel bag over his shoulder. The diary was inside, along with the sealed envelope marked "Open last." He had stared at that envelope for hours the night before, held it in his hands, turned it over, thought about breaking the seal. But something inside him whispered, not here, not yet. The house had given him so much already. Memories, letters, forgotten truths. But there was one place left he needed to visit. A place he hadn't seen in decades. Not since before everything changed. A small lake outside Toronto. Patricia used to take him there when he was a boy. It was quiet, hidden, untouched by the noise of the world. She would pack sandwiches and a blanket, and they would sit on the shore for hours, skipping stones and talking about everything and, sometimes, nothing at all. He remembered her laugh most clearly. They're soft, real, unguarded, and now, after everything he had read, he needed to hear it again. Not with his ears, but with his heart. He arrived in the early afternoon. The lake hadn't changed, not even a little. The trees still curved around it like gentle arms. The water was calm, glassy, as if waiting. The same bench sat near the edge, weathered by time but still standing. He walked to it slowly and sat down. No cameras, no fans, no schedule. Just him and the wind. He took out the diary and turned to one of the last entries. The handwriting was even slower now, more fragile. But the message was clear. I kept dreaming about the lake lately. Not the water, but you there, older, peaceful. As if you had finally come home to yourself. Maybe that's how I'll find you again if there's a next life. I'll look for you by the water. I hope you still remember how to skip stones. And I hope you know I loved every version of you, even the broken ones, especially the broken ones. He closed the diary. Gently, his hands reached for the smooth, flat stones beneath the bench. They were still there, just like before, waiting. He stood, walked to the edge of the water, and tossed the first one. It skipped once, then twice, then sank. He smiled. The next one skipped 4 times. He could almost hear her clapping softly behind him like she used to. He turned slowly and looked around. No one was there, and yet it didn't feel empty. He sat again. This time he reached for the sealed envelope. His fingers hesitated, but only for a second. Then he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The writing was shaky. Clearly the last thing she ever wrote to him. It wasn't long. It's just a handful of lines, but it was enough. If this is the last thing you read, for me, let it be this. You did it. You became the man I hoped for. Not because of your success or the movies or the world's praise, but because you never let pain turn you cruel. Because you chose love when life gave you loss. Because you always came back. And one day, when you are old and gray, and the world has forgotten all the roles you've played, someone will sit beside you, and they will feel safe and not because you were famous, because you were kind. That is your legacy. The wind stirred the trees gently. He sat there for a long time, letting the words wash over him, letting her voice settle in the corners of his soul. She had written every page for him, but also for the part of him he had forgotten, the part that needed healing, the part that needed permission to let go of guilt, of grief, of the feeling that he had somehow never been enough. She had given him that gift in silence, in ink, in love. He folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and held it close to his chest. Then he whispered, "Thank you, Mom." A single tear rolled down his cheek. Not heavy, it's not filled with sorrow, just peace. Before leaving, he picked one final stone and tossed it across the lake. It skipped 7 times, his best ever, and for a moment smiled wider than he had in years. Not for the world, but for her, and for the boy he had once been, the boy who had loved her long before the lights, the cameras, and the stage, the boy she had never stopped seeing, the boy who had just come home. The final Keanu walked back into the house just before sunset. He carried no suitcase this time, only the diary and the envelope, now folded gently inside the back cover. Everything else could wait. This wasn't about organizing drawers or signing documents. Anymore, this was about closure, and something even deeper. Beginning again, the air inside. The house felt different now, warmer, lighter, like the echoes of grief had finally made space for something else. Not joy exactly, but peace. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't rush, just waits patiently until you're ready. He moved through each room slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the things she had left behind. But this time, he didn't feel like they were reminders of what was gone. It felt like gentle proof of what had always been here. Love everywhere. He returned to the living room, sat on the couch, and opened the diary one last time. There were only 2 pages left. The second to last began with a single line, "You stayed." The writing was uneven, and it looked like she had paused between sentences, as if searching for the right words, knowing they would be her last. "I know what pain you carry. Some of it I couldn't stop. Some of it I watched from afar, helpless. I saw you lose people you loved. I saw you carry that silence with grace. But here's what I never told you: grief didn't make you smaller. It made you more gentle, more human, more you. People think pain ruins us, but sometimes it makes us more real. And you, my son, are the realest person I have ever known." He paused there, reading those lines again and again. Then he turned. The page to the very last entry, it wasn't a memory. It wasn't even a message. It was a prayer. "If I am no longer beside you when you read this, I ask only one thing. Do not disappear. Do not vanish into your sorrow. Do not become the man who stops showing up for others because he thinks kindness makes him weak. The world will need you, Keanu. Not the star, not the actor, but the man who knows how to sit with someone's silence and not look away. You've always had a light in you. Don't hide it just because the world didn't protect you. Let someone else feel warm beside you. Be what you've always been home." There were no more words after that. No signature. No date. Just the quiet end of a journey that had started long ago. With a single mother and her young son trying to figure out the world together, Keanu sat there for a long time, holding the diary in his lap, and then he did something he hadn't done in years. He laughed softly at first. Then, a little louder. Not because anything was funny, because something in him had finally let go. Not of her, but of the weight, of the silence, of the unspoken fear that maybe he had failed her. Maybe he had missed his chance to say what needed to be said, but now he knew Shay had already heard. Him, in the way he lived, in the way he loved, in the way he kept going. He stood up and walked to the small desk in the corner, opened a drawer, found a blank journal. He sat back down, took a pen, and on the first page he wrote, "For her, and for anyone who needs to remember what love looks like when it never stops trying." He began to write. Not about the fame. It's not about the films. Not even about the grief. He wrote about the mornings. She brushed his hair when he was too tired to do it himself. He wrote about the nights she stayed up with him, During auditions, he thought he'd fail. He wrote about how she used to say, "We're not broken, we're just learning." He wrote until the sun had disappeared behind the hills, until the house was dark again, until the words stopped needing to be pulled. They simply flowed. And somewhere in the silence, he felt her not behind him, not above him, but inside him, like breath, like rhythm, like home. The next day, he placed the diary gently in a wooden box and locked it. He didn't put it away. He left it on the shelf, visible, ready, because he knew someone else might need it one day. Maybe a nephew, friend, maybe just someone who wandered into this house of memories and needed to be reminded that kindness never disappears. He looked around the room one last time, then walked out into the morning sun, smiling not because everything was fixed, but because love had done its job. It had kept speaking, even when she no longer could, and he had finally listened.